We have with us as well, last but not least, Karimi Kinoti, who's the lead at Africa Division at Christian Aid. She's an international development practitioner who champions approaches to Africa's socio-economic transformation and political governance that harnesses the dignity, agency, and resourcefulness of African people to achieve just and sustainable development. She has been working in the NGO sector for over 20 years, so quite a bit of experience there. So we've seen that the finance landscape has changed drastically in the last decade or so, and it continues to do so at a really fast pace. We've seen the global pandemic also forcing governments to rethink finance and how they're spending their budgets as well. What then does building forward together mean if countries aren't honoring their commitments, even as we talk about, holding power to account and the commitments and the pledges that they have made?
Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this panel discussion today. And a warm congratulations to Aphrodite for bringing us together at what is indeed a critical juncture in our continent's development trajectory, and really beginning to ask the question, as you have said, what are these debt instruments, how have they served us, and what is the way forward? So indeed, making Africa a rule maker rather than a rule taker starts with a very honest retrospective conversation as we have had this week. And so as we look at how COVID has devastated our economies and, being on top of the many challenges that we already had as a continent, the question of the unsustainable debt and what it's doing in denying our governments the much needed resources. First of all, to provide social protection for those who have lost their jobs, but also the life-saving vaccines that enable us to reopen our economies. So, Maya, to your question, first of all, one of the instruments, of course, we know is ODA, so Overseas Development Assistance, that has continued to be driven by self-interest. So it's truly unconscionable that in the middle of a deadly COVID pandemic, and we are on the third or fourth wave of it as Africa, we should see that rich countries are shipping out of the continent 10 million doses of the single-shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine to add to their stockpiles, while what we have secured is only 7.9 million doses. Of course, in our case, we need 2 doses. So you can imagine what that means. So going back to ODA, yes, an important tool to supplement the resources we need for our development. However, the question of where that commitment is, if only 5 countries out of all the OECD countries, only 5 of them have delivered on their 0.7% gross national income when it comes to international aid. And in the case of the UK, that's down from 0.7 against their own laws. So to me, it means that for Africa, for our African governments, but also African people, we need to move away from an international aid system that kind of goes on charity. It has to be about justice. And if it is about justice, then it is time for us as a continent, which is a net creditor to the world, to turn inwards. So when we talk of retrospection, and I'd say introspection as well, what that means is, first of all, that we have to strengthen our domestic resource mobilization in the ways that the panelists have talked about, trade being very important, and governments being able to build up their domestic resource tax base, but also curbing illicit financial flows. Secondly, it means that as a continent, we need to make a concerted, collective effort to actively engage in the sustainable debt restructuring and cancellation agenda. Similarly, that debate on reforming the broken global tax architecture cannot be left to those who have designed it to be broken. So we must be single-minded in securing our stake in that reform agenda. The opportunity that the African Free Trade Area provides in really leveraging our comparative advantage as the 54 nations of Africa to benefit our people and ensure that, for instance, small-scale farmers are able to feed our continent, and we reduce the food import bill. There's no reason why we can't feed ourselves as Africans, and at the same time that our entrepreneurs, our innovators are creating jobs, as others have said. And then I would say really maximizing our bargaining power as the continent and as our governments with African civil society, one, holding governments to account and ensuring they're speaking on behalf of our collective population, and similarly complementing the efforts at government level. And as I end, to say that drawing inwards needs to be with a common agenda, shared values, and a collective voice. Because if we're not doing so, there is no way we can engage with the rest of the world and achieve the aspirations of both the Agenda 2030 and 2063. Finally, as I finish, of course, we can't absorb the responsibility of developed nations that have benefited from our labor, our capital, and other resources. And at this point, just to go back to the contribution that Joanne has just shared, the effects of climate change, where we are bearing the brunt of those effects, and the impact of climate change is one that we need to really bring to the fore, and as we're talking about debt and development. Thank you.
Ms. Kinoti, those are very powerful points there. So many different moving parts. I like especially what you said about the agriculture sector, considering that Africa has one of the most fertile lands in the globe, yet we are importing more than actually being able to feed our own population. But I think my time is up. I have about 2 minutes left, but I'd like to get your final thoughts, because you summarized it so well when you took a look at the different aspects that we need to think about when we're thinking of solutions, some of the proposals for macroeconomic policies, the oxymoron of the youth bulge. You talked about gender inequality, climate change, and so on. As we wind up, what is your final message as far as what role you feel that the CSOs and the NGOs should be playing in applying pressure to ensure that Africa does not come out as a rule taker, a rule maker, but rather comes out as a rule taker?
First and foremost is that we need to we need to be part of these global processes. And it's not so much that we don't have the technical capacity, we don't have the knowledge, we don't know what we want, we don't have the ideas, but it is really collectively, and I want to emphasize this, collectively as African CSOs, yes, we all have a part to play, but bringing that together in ways that insist that we must be part of the conversation. We have to be at the table. These processes have not benefited us in many ways. They're very fast-paced, some of them, including COP26, for example. There are all manner of challenges. But in order for us to be a rule maker, we need to say we are going to sit at that table and be part and parcel of those processes. So whether it is on climate issues, and of course we talked about the challenges that we face as a continent, whether it is around the broken tax system that hasn't benefited us. It's very important that we find ways and means and insist that it is a moral obligation that we are part and parcel of these conversations, that what we have to say matters. So it's not about those who have the money are the ones who dictate what goes and what doesn't move. And so I think voice and having the confidence that we know what we're talking about, that really if sustainable development, if the aspirations of Agenda 23 and Agenda 2030 are to happen, then that, going beyond the slogan that of not leaving anyone behind needs to move from rhetoric to practice.
Thank you so much for that, Ms. Kinoti, and also for taking time off your busy schedule to be with us this afternoon. My take home from you was that it's a collective effort, that everybody has a role to play, no matter where you're from, no matter your age, your gender.
To read and sign the Harare Declaration, go to www.afrodat.org/initiatives. Click on Afrodat Conference on Data and Development, and then read more. And finally, the outcome statement.